Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Alfreda Love, and I'm presenting to you the Special Education Overrepresentation PowerPoint. And the reason why I am presenting this PowerPoint is to allow you to become more aware of special education and the implications that are set for special education. When we seek out special education overrepresentation, we analyze the various districts in the United States and out of the United States, and we've discovered that overrepresentation to some is a direct effect of what others believe special education overrepresentation is. So within this PowerPoint, you will understand the various aspects of special education as well as the implications to overcome the myth of special education overrepresentation, especially in minorities. Overrepresentation. When one speaks of overrepresentation, that means that there are too many. There are too many, for instance, grapes. There are too many apples. There are too many oranges. There are too many bananas. That's overrepresentation. But I want to propose to you that we're not speaking of apples and oranges and grapes. We're speaking of children. And it's very important that we begin to focus on need rather than quantity. Quantity represents the number of students according to their culture, their background, who are placed in special education. When we think about special education, we must think about the quantity in a different perspective. What does that mean? That means that quantity should be measured by an academic research-based test that illustrates what students actually know. And if a student falls short of that and a student needs special education services, they should be able to receive those services without teachers, administrators in schools having to worry about overrepresentation. It is very important and essential. We're dealing with human beings, not apples, oranges, and grapes. When we look at needs, everyone has at least one need. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the need to belong. We want students to feel like they're a part of the community, whether they're fast learners or whether they're unique learners. And when there is a need for a student, it must be met. That is our duty. That is our job as school officials. And so in this presentation, okay, we believe that humans are not apples, oranges, and grapes. We're human and we all have needs. And so with this, we need to rethink overrepresentation and think of our students as humans. Grade levels behind due to overrepresentation and students not being able to receive their services because schools are being penalized because they've placed so many students in special education services. Once again, this is correlated to teacher retention. This is correlated to instructional time because if a student is not engaged, if a student does not understand the concepts, then the student will take up instruction time, which means that you're losing as a teacher instruction time. Once again, overrepresentation. Students lack needs. There are students who need individualized education plans, speech therapy, behavior intervention plans. But due to the teacher shortage and due to overrepresentation, only a few students can receive those services. Free and appropriate education. I've always viewed education as free. Anytime you enroll your child, no matter where you go, it's free unless you take your child to a private school. We're speaking of public right now. And appropriate education. Overrepresentation may or may not appropriate a children's or a child's education. Appropriate education means that each student within the school has an individualized education plan. It does not mean a formal one for those who have special needs, but it means that the teacher is able to provide the services for each student in his or her classroom. And with this free and appropriate education, overrepresentation is hindering, it's tying the hands of some of our educators, teachers, and administrators because overrepresentation places a number according to the amount of students who are being served. Those students who are being served within those special education services need those services, and they just may happen to be of one culture. So we really need to focus on the needs, and we need to correlate students as humans rather than apples, oranges, and grapes. They're humans. The solution that we're going to discuss is funding of staff, college integration of special education, trainer or trainers. You can have one trainer, or everyone on your campus can be a trainer. Then, of course, grants. In reviewing Love's first essential, the chart came from the U.S. Department of Education. We're talking about quantity, which deals with numbers, percentages, and focus on gender or race. And when we look at intellectual disability, we have a little bit under 60%, right? And that's Hispanic. For African Americans, we have about 10%. For those who are emotionally disturbed, Hispanic, we have a little over 30%. For emotional disturbance for African Americans, we have about 15%. And then emotionally disturbed, we have 40%. Pacific learning disabilities, we have a little bit over 60% for Hispanic. We have a little bit, 10% for Blacks, African Americans. And for whites, we have a little bit under 5%. When we analyze and review these particular elements of special education and dealing with the quantity, what these numbers suggest is that in each category, in each race, there is a need for special education teachers. Now, when we speak of overrepresentation, just because this chart does not indicate a rate of individuals who are served by special education does not mean that there are students who do not need the services. Now then, when we look at our Hispanic population, one of the major focuses dealing with strategies, techniques, funding is dealing with our English language learners. Students are able to conquer their success if they have the correct strategies to help them with their second language. African Americans are capable of learning. There are certain strategies, once again, that they must have in class. And when we look at overrepresentation, okay, if we provide the essential tools, resources, then students will be able to receive those resources and may be able to graduate from utilizing those resources. But the students need help. Then we speak about our white population. Okay, same thing. There are strategies for different types of learning disabilities, different type of emotions. And we as educators, as leaders, we have to be able to provide each and every student with these tools. When we speak about overrepresentation, this is not an indication of all the students in the United States who need special education services. There are some students that have not been identified yet. You will have some students who you will find out when you begin to teach them. And so this is not a representation. And so what I challenge the stakeholders to do is to go to the various schools and to understand the learning process, because overrepresentation is just a number of individuals, maybe from the same culture, rather than data that these students actually need special education services. Solution. My name is Dr. Alfreda Love, and I'm going to work on a campaign with special education. I have a project. And when analyzing the various states, okay, these states represent how many teachers are in each state. And this also came from the Bureau of Statistics. And we have a shortage of teachers in special education. And we have so many students. And in the paper, in the US news, there are so many students who need occupational therapy, speech therapy, but they're unable to receive it because we don't have enough individuals trained in those areas. And so my proposal is, first of all, we need to have funding of staff. What does this mean? This means that in each school, my proposal for the state is to have staff who are able to deal with crises. As far as when I say crises, I'm speaking about techniques for unique learners. In addition to that, having staff who are trained to help coach and model and deal with behaviors of students who are there on campus, okay? And also having an initiative for educators, administrators to have some background in special education, go back to school, because it's very important. And the special education program, the strategies that are used may be used with any student. We know that graphic organizers, visuals, that can be used with any student to enhance learning. Questioning techniques, movement, kinesthetic, tactile, all those things can be used. Okay? The colleges, the integration of special education. When we analyze colleges, all right, there are some areas such as applied behaviors. There are some areas in special education that are taken, but not to the degree of preparing teachers who did not major in special education to go into a classroom and understand the social emotional behaviors of the student. I was speaking to Dr. Ruby Payne, and she said something very profound, and that was when students have social and emotional behaviors, we try to give them like behavioral consequences when it's really social and emotional. So we have to know what strategies to utilize. She mentioned strategies such as just drinking water to help students. One of the strategies also is to play a little Mozart. And so it's very important that we have these techniques in this background training as we're either teaching teachers or as we're working beside them within the classrooms. Trainer of trainers. Once again, my name is Dr. Afrida Love. I speak about special education. This is one of my big projects, education, all types of education. And I'm available. I want to attend conferences. I want to come to your school. I want to speak to your students. I want to speak to your staff. I want to go out in the community. I'm available, and I will give you my information at the end. Here's a website with grants. And so you can look at this website, type it in to your search bar, and those are grants for teachers. And it's very important that we begin to have a grant team on campus. Select a grant team, because one of the things your school is going to need are grants. And a lot of people do not like writing grants because it says it takes too much time. But the benefits of writing grants is essential. Be sure you have a team for that, for writing grants. My next essential is playing catch up. Playing catch up means, for instance, you have students running the 400-meter dash, which is one time around the track. You start all the students out on the same line, and you have a student in the back while everybody else is at the 200 mark. This student is probably just now getting started. And so with that, teachers in the classroom, they're becoming frustrated because they have to backpedal They have to play catch up because, once again, overrepresentation and students not having their essential accommodations, modifications due to overrepresentation. One doesn't want to put too many students in the same special ed category or give those students services because there's going to be a penalty. And so all year long, the teacher's playing catch up. Okay. Remediation. Remediation is very essential because students need remediation. In many schools that I've been to, I've worked at, right? The schedules are embedded where students have time to have remediation. It's very important that with remediation, those strategies are utilized to help students be successful and to understand the concept of learning. What happens so many times is that individuals are great teachers in their field. And when one enters the classroom, they have the lack of training for dealing with emotional behavior, social behavior. They have the lack of training with dealing with those special needs students. Their patience become thin and they become impatient with the student. And then they lose instruction time, they lose relationship. And so it's very important that you continue in training, especially when working with special needs students, working with students who need behavior plans, students who need individualized educational plans. When students are off grade level, there is a high chance, research suggests, that this student is going to be a discipline issue. And the reason why is because that student is not engaged in what is being taught. What I mean by engagement, the student doesn't understand, so they're doing something else. Once we're able to provide those necessary needs for the students, those students will become engaged. Once we begin to pique that student's interest, that student will become engaged. But if we continue with this overrepresentation, we're going to continue to have individuals come to different classrooms, different grades, off grade level. And we're going to continue to lose instructional time, and we're going to see an increase in discipline. Overrepresentation, as I said before, is just like playing catch up. I placed this video here because I wanted you to see an example of playing catch up. There is a runner here in Chariot of Fire, and this runner is running. This runner is very fast, and this runner falls. They're like, get up, get up, get up. And that's what we want to happen when we have students who are falling behind, students who are not understanding the lesson. We want to make sure that we provide them with the support that they need in order to get up and keep running, because students become discouraged when they're in the classroom and they don't understand the lesson. And so what do? Most of the time, they're off task and cause behavior problems and take away the instructional time. I'm going to see if this video plays, but this is Chariot of Fire. Get up and finish the race. They're running to the line. Just a second, I'm going to turn it up for you. Let's see. The computer is kind of stopping a little bit, but this is Chariots of Fire. And he runs and he falls. That's the support. He's back up. Everyone's cheering him on. He's passing up a couple of individuals. That's that support. All right. So once you watch that particular video, you will be able to see that in Chariots of Fire, the gentleman was running, he's quick, and all of a sudden he falls. And that's what happens sometimes. And the support that he was given, and he got back up and he finished. And that's what we want to do with our students. When we see that our students are failing and that our students are not making the mark, we don't want to say, well, it's overrepresentation, we can't put you in special ed. We want to say, here's your support, we cheer you on, finish the race. All right. Remediation time. Remediation time is from pre-K through 12th grade and college as well. With remediation time, this is a time for the educator to work with your students. During this time, there are strategies that are used, mostly kinesthetic, some tactile. There are strategies that are used, and these strategies will reiterate what was taught, whether it's through games, whether it's through allowing the student to read, whether it's through STEM cards, whatever it is, remediation needs to be embedded in the everyday schedule, especially for our special education students, our GT students of that nature. What is the appropriate time for learning to occur? I correlate learning with exercise. After 15 minutes, you begin to burn calories. After 15 minutes, students begin to learn, because at the beginning, students are just trying to process the information within their brain, okay? Then after that 10 minutes to 15 minutes, the students are putting the process together. And so that's when learning really occurs, after the 15 minutes. And so what one wants to do when you're teaching, in order for the student to capture the foundation, there must be some type of visual, there must be some type of kinesthetic project that will allow the student, or writing, that will allow the student to remember, okay, what the task is. What is engagement? Engagement looks different for many educators, for many leaders. When we speak about engagement, okay, we're speaking about not only a student just looking and being engaged in your lesson, but a student being able to apply what was learned. The ability to apply deals with those Costas levels of questioning, deals with different stems of questioning, Bloom's taxonomy, deals with different visuals, graphic organizers, being able to work as a team to create a project. Those particular things consist of engagement. And so engagement is like an advertisement. So when one begins to get up and engage the student in what is being learned, it has to be 30 seconds and it has to be a hook, you know, and we're going to learn those particular things. You have to hook the student so that they will maintain engagement within the classroom. Lack of instructional time equals lack of training. When we speak about special education and speak about the social and emotional behaviors, some teachers become upset and become frustrated within the classroom and want to go into other professions because of how much instructional time they've lost. I remember reading a Facebook post where there was a teacher in another state who indicated that she was going to leave the profession of education, she says, because the discipline was just out of hand. And she showed a picture of her classroom where the students had basically destroyed her classroom. And it goes back to expectations and having those tools in order to provide teachers with the essentials so they can deal with those type of behaviors, because I don't believe it's fair for teachers to have to deal with behaviors without tools. And so they need to be able to deal with the various behaviors with tools and coaching. So basically, when teachers become frustrated, it's just a lack of training. It's just that they need more training with different techniques so that they will be able to take that training and apply it, as I said before, to that student's behavior. All right, so increased discipline, 21 elementary. All right, the 21, for those of you who wants to know what that means, that is a code that is often utilized in elementary. We're speaking at this point about overrepresentation in ISS, DAEP placement, OSS, and things of that nature. When we see a violation of student code of conduct, could be bullying, harassing, it could be talking back to the teacher, it may go under fighting. All of these are coded as 21. Now, many students, what happens, whether they're special ed, GT, it really doesn't matter. Many students who become or get in trouble in class are asked to leave. They're removed from the instructional process. And what's happening is that some students are repeat offenders, meaning that they either go to ISS and then within 2 days they're back, or they go to OSS, 2 days they're back, or they go to DAEP, which is alternative, and 20 days or 15 days or 5 days or 30 days, the student comes back. Well, if the student is returning and the same behavior is happening, there has to be something done. And so some of the options that can be done is make an observation, all right, find patterns and trends. And once that is accomplished, then finding those strategies to help that student, to assist that student. Because what we don't want, as Dr. Ruby Payne said, was consequences for social and emotional behaviors. And when I speak about consequences, I'm not saying that if a student has a social or emotional behavior, then just overlook it. No, what I'm saying is that you must put strategies in place to teach that student how to control those behaviors. And so when we look at 21 elementary, that means that those are the amount of students who are sent or who have some type of discipline consequence. And those numbers are relatively high. And therefore, with behavior intervention plans, with goal setting and allowing the student to have ownership, then the teacher will have more instructional time. In secondary, there are high rates of DAEP placement, expulsion, because these students are older, and some of the reasons why individuals may go to an alternative placement is due to fighting, any of those particular things, bringing weapons, any of those things, and this student may be expelled or they may receive some type of, they can receive some type of penalty or violation. And so in the secondary, okay, there is a huge number of individuals who are going off campus to alternative placements and missing instruction time. And so with these trainings, we're going to be speaking about some of the instructional techniques that will keep these students in the classroom and help to maintain structure, and the teacher will be able to instruct the student to his or her fullest. So when we look at special education, it promotes inclusion, social and emotional well-being. And this is the particular slide where I want to appease to the Senate and to those who are making decisions. It's very important that special education continues to have their funding. And the reason why I say that is because with this funding, students are able to become more inclusive in the classrooms, and we have the resources available for these students where they're able to learn with their peers. And so it's very important that the funding continues. And inclusion means that these students are able to come into the classroom and work just like the other students, but they may have the aids or they may have the supplementary materials to help when they are working problems. Social and emotional. It's very important. I'm taking classes on applied behaviors in special education and going through the various strategies and charts and analyzing behaviors in order to apply the appropriate response to various behaviors. Because if you have a social and emotional student, then the consequences that are utilized for regular behavior should not be used. It has to be a cause and it has to be an effect. So therefore, special education promotes inclusion, social and emotional well-being for all students. So what does inclusion look like? It looks like individuals sitting around a table, sharing ideas. Looks like the teacher working on various interventions for the student, And it looks like giving those particular modifications to the student, whether it's IEP, whether it's BIP, and those particular elements within the behavior plan and within the individualized education plan are essential, because this allows the student to not only be inclusive, but also to utilize and apply those particular supplements and accommodations and modifications to their work. All right, so this figure is from Mr. John, and this relates to the emotional brain. When we look at the emotional brain, there is the thinking process and feeling process. All right, what I want you to pay attention to is the brain stem, because the brain stem, if you look at it, which is number one, when we look at the brain stem, it connects and is close to the spinal cord. And all of this, the hypothalamus and all of these particular elements of the brain, right, causes the student to act out within the classroom. Because at the front, we're dealing with thinking, feeling, right? And then with the basic functioning, we're dealing with eating, sleeping, breathing. But the brainstem causes, right? It connects and it causes some type of response. And so this is how students respond in an emotional way. All right, and we're looking at the brain here. This is the emotional part of the brain. So any of these areas that are triggered, the student could have a meltdown, or there could be a behavior in the classroom. When one look at special education, we have cognitive impairment. This is the IQ of 70 or below, all right? And with this, students can be classified as MR, or they can have developmental delays and intellectual disabilities, right? Difficulty showering, eating, brushing their teeth. All of these are all related to cognition when we talk about special education. Now, we're also going to speak about some instances in which special education relates to hearing, special education relates to seeing. We're going to look at all of those particular elements. That's why it's so important that special education continue to have their funding. This next chart is the population of special education students in the United States. Once again, this is from the United States Department of Education. All right, in 2015, 2016, we had 6.7 million students. In 2017, 2018, we had 7.0 million. 2019, 7.4 million. Unidentified students, 34%. Now, when we look at these percentages, 6.7, 7.0, 7.4, the pattern that I see is that these programs and the students are increasing who need special education services. And due to overrepresentation, once again, these are only some of the students, because some students were not able to be tested because there was an overrepresentation. Unidentified students, 34%. That means that these students are still waiting to take the test or receive the results, or that means that the teacher is going to have to identify who the student is or students are, and therefore these students are now unidentified, 34%. Okay. All right, when we speak of the term overrepresentation, we must understand that it's very important that students with learning disabilities receive their accommodations, receive their instructions of how to be successful. It's very important that we have behavioral interventions in place. That's the BIP, behavior interventions in place, which means building relationships and being proactive. Individual education plans research, that means the IEP, all right? We have to have those goals for the students, what are they able to do, and we have to have their particular cognitive score. Graduation plans, for special ed students, about 60% graduate, and that's a pretty good number. But what about the 40% who are left? Okay, overrepresentation one more time, because we're looking at quantity rather than needs, and we're supposed to be looking at needs rather than quantity. All right, this particular employment map is an employment of special education teachers. And this came from the U.S. Department of Education. And with this, if you look at the green, these are the highest amounts of individuals with special education teachers. And the next time I'm going to show you a chart with the special education teachers and how many students are actually served. Funding. Funding needs to remain. I was reading an article in which President Trump wanted to use the funding for after-school programs and special education to build the wall. Well, once again, right? Students are not apples, oranges, and grapes. They're humans. And we must provide those students with the services and the funding. The funding needs to remain for special education. And it's important that students receive all of their accommodations and modifications. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on tonight. And remember that you can connect with me, as you see on the screen, at EMONYA_love@yahoo.com or LinkedIn at Our Free to Love. I would love, love, love to have you on the ministry and also speak about education. Thank you so much. So this concludes the presentation, and I hope you have a blessed morning.